pointer on gun 5, and I had myself a great big telescope, 50-power telescope on that sight, on the 2 guys, a pointer and a trainer. You can see the beach. I mean, you can see what's going on over there. Lots of people moving around, and you didn't see, if you ever pay attention to stuff that they're showing, you don't see anybody ducking behind something or crawling in someplace. You'll see them guys standing right on top of a pillbox. Now, if anybody with any sense ain't going to stand up there, and if there's somebody up in a tree, they're going to take a shot at you, you know. But apparently, when you're doing all this stuff, you're more concerned about what you're doing than you are what somebody's going to try to do to you, you know, because it's got to be that way. And I think maybe that's why so much of that stuff happens, that somebody makes it and somebody don't make it. In fact, when we went into Beijo Island, the Japanese opened us up on us first. They had some 8-inch stuff that they had brought over from Singapore that they'd taken away from the British, and they had them on the beach over there. And when we launched our patrol planes in the morning, they could see the exhaust from that airplane. And they spotted that. When we lit them airplanes off, they started hammering us with that 8-inch stuff. And we were bearing starboard side too, and I could see this, you know, coming from the beach, and I'm flashing, you know. And what gets over here is of no concern of mine. It's that ones that to whom they may be concerned that's coming. That's the ones that, this one, you missed us with this one, but where's the next one coming? And the port side is listening to the starboard side on headphones, and the guy on the port side, he's saying, they're lobbing them right between our stack. I mean, they weren't missing by very much, you know, but we just kept moving out and moving away, you know. And when we started, it was just one crop of green. And when we got through, it looked like a box of somebody had spilled a box of toothpicks. There wasn't anything that had any foliage on it anymore. It was all knocked to pieces. And you couldn't understand how anybody, even a rat, could have lived on that cotton picket island when we quit shooting at it. I mean, it was a real mess. I mean, we tore that up with them 16-inch. Well, they had 12 feet of coconut logs, and they had pillboxes that were steel enforced and 3 feet thick, you know, and we could bounce them what we call high HPs, which is high explosive stuff, you know, on there, and that was like shooting golf ball. So we put in APs, armor piercing stuff. And we'd get in there, and we were a mile and a half off the beach. Instead of elevating that gun to shoot over there, we loaded the son of a gun and we depressed it and shot directly into that stuff. Man, I mean, that would go in there and I had to blow the top right out of it. It was a wild. Those that were hung up on the reef and those that were hiding behind that dock that they had sticking out there, you know, all that stuff, you could see that all day long. And then we hung around there for, I don't know, 3-4 days. We do a little what we call coal fire. If there happens to be a place that has to be softened up, we're their artillery. They don't have it. They don't have anything. We got 5-inch stuff back here, and we got some 16-inch stuff if we need it. And we just, when they call fire, we go right in position there and we soften it up and make mush out of it, and then send some guys in to check to see that if there's anything crawling around in there. It was only 400 yards wide and about a half a mile long. It looked like a leg of lamb is what it looked like. If you look at Beijo Island, it looked like about a leg of lamb. That was the Holocaust. That one was a real bummer because I had to watch that night after we secured from 8 to midnight. And while we were on watch, we counted 17 bodies floating by the ship because we were just laying off the shore. We weren't going anywhere. We were just kind of laying off the shore, and we weren't going anywhere. And all of them kids that floated by, there wasn't a Japanese among them. They were all our own. So we knew very well that those kids that were on the beach didn't have no picnic. And lots of them never got on there to even fire around, you know. They were dead before they hit the beach. They even maybe drowned with their pack on because they couldn't get into shallow enough water to get ashore. It ain't no fun. It's very absolute. It's January the 31st, 1944. I was quadrilling in the marshes. First of all, I had to look and see where it was. Well, it comes up there and it ain't nothing but a green patch. And just a big coral reef sticking out of the water, and it's covered with green from one end. Might be coconut, it might be just banyan, that kind of growth, you know. And we knew there was a lot of them on there. And they weren't quite as fortified as they were in the Gilberts, because they spent a little bit more time on the Gilberts than they did in Kwajalein. We always start before, as soon as she breaks day, we're gonna be right on top of them. Everybody opens up, everybody knows what they've been assigned to do when you do it. You know, we don't try to interfere with somebody, we'll do that in case somebody needs some help, then we'll be over there to give them a hand, you know. Which happened over in Saipan, happened that way, that Minneapolis couldn't do nothing over on her side of the island with her 8-inch, so the Maryland went over there and put the 16-inch in there, and they went and cleaned that up. Everything's all lined up and it's all coordinated, and each got their own sector, and they know how they're going to get this done because they've practiced it, they know how to do it. And we do it according to plan. I mean, it ain't just some happenstance, you know. We know what time this is going to happen, then what time that's going to happen, and we hope that everybody gets on the same page and we do this together. Learn how to fight. And you know what? I'm going to be 90 years old, and I can't remember when I lost any sleep over what I had to do. It's either me or thee. Rather thee than me. It's like Patton said, I don't want some guy in an outfit that's willing to die for his country. I want some guy in my outfit that'll make that other bastard die for his country. Well, I would say we were tough. We had to be tough because we were fighting tough people. These people, you know, and we even got to the point where we were even tougher than tough. We were snarly. I mean, that snarly is worse than tough. I mean, you don't want to tangle with snarly because they've got no mercy in the other hand. I mean, once we had to leave prematurely because we had burned out our main battery. And we went back to the States because they had no equipment or weaponry out in the Pacific, so we went back to Bremerton. I'll tell you how it happened. I was up on a battery, and there was a kid by the name of Markison. He wasn't a yeoman, he was a fire controlman, but he was working in the gunnery office as a yeoman. And he came up on the battery one day, and I had been there. We'd been there probably 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks maybe already. He says to me, "Hey, Joe Guns." They call me Joe because my name is Firman, and they call me Joe Guns because I'm a gunner's mate. He says, "Hey, Joe Guns." He says, "I got a transfer on my desk right now for a second-class gunner's mate to go to new construction." And that's, of course, what we're doing. We're taking all the old veterans that survived the sinking of some ship, or they were served a certain amount of time in the battle area, and they take those guys and bring them back and send them over there to a new ship so that you haven't got a bunch of recruits on board. They did that with the Juno. They put the Juno together and they sent her out there, and 2 weeks later she was on the bottom because she had a perfectly green crew. Ironic part about that is that Markison stayed on a Maryland. She got hammered by a torpedo in Saipan. She went over to Okinawa and she got hit by a kamikaze. in the Philippines, and then she went over to Okinawa, and she got hammered with another one, and he got caught at second kamikaze, and they were not at battle stations. He was in his living compartment down on second deck when that kamikaze come in there and hit that, and that bomb went down into his living compartment. And Marcuson never went home to visit his wife. He was married. His wife was in San Francisco. He never got to see her. He died in that compartment. And Firman was on Eniwetok and still living. There was a net tender. They're submarine nets, you know. They put them in the harbors to block off the entrance, or they put them around capital ships so that if there's a submarine out there and they hammer it, they're going to hit the torpedo net before they hit the main ship, you know. We had a guy by the name of Conklin. He was our radio man. When you woke Conklin out of his bunk, you didn't go over there and just go over there and poke him like this. You went around behind the bunk and you reached around and you poked him like that, because he'd be, as soon as you touched him, he was 3 steps up the gangplank already, going up topside, because he had just come off of a destroyer that got shot out from under him. And he knew well enough that when he was laying there sleeping and somebody's messing with him, he's going to find daylight before he's going to finally stop and turn around and come walking back and put his clothes back on. So that was a good example of a guy who had a ship shot out from under him. Yeah, and we're at Eniwetok. You could tell we had been in there. I mean, trees just don't grow up overnight, you know. She looked pretty barren. And when I got off the ship and I spent 3 weeks on that island, you know, I learned a lot of things while I was there. I learned to like Spam. I learned how to wash my clothes with salt water.
From these bases, our shore-based air power could hammer the cities of the homeland. And from these bases, we could apply the atomic bomb at the instant of its development, hastening the end of the war.
No, I was in Bikini Atoll. I was not in Eniwetok. I went home, and then I came back, and that's when they sent me. I spent 8 months over there, from March until October in Bikini Islands in the Marshalls. That's another atoll. That's not the Kwajalein Atoll. I was off to Coho. I got off to Coho and went back, and I went back on the Luther Hurd, an old tramp steamer, could only make 4 knots. Took us 3 weeks to go from Pearl Harbor, 2,400 miles. Took us 3 weeks to go from Pearl Harbor, from Eniwetok to Pearl Harbor. And you know what? I gained 10 pounds. Now those people knew how to feed. There was civilians aboard that. There was there was a Navy crew on there, and I knew some of them. But anyhow, they lived with them civilian seamen, merchant marines. Boy, I'm telling you, they lived like kings. Well, I had been on 3 different ships. I went out there on the Bayfield, and from the Bayfield I got transferred on to another APA, which is the George Clymer, and then from the George Clymer I was transferred on to LST 881. And that's where I made first class petty officer. We had a skipper on there. His name was John C. Scott. And John C. Scott was a Mustang. A Mustang is a commissioned officer that come up through the ranks and became a commissioned officer. And John C. Scott was the skipper on there. He was a full lieutenant. And I was taking a course in refrigeration, because when I came home, I had a guy here in Green Bay who said, if you learn something about refrigeration while you're in the Navy, I'll hire you when you come home. So I was all primed and prepared to go over there, and got one from the Armed Forces Institute out of Madison. So I'm doing all this paperwork, you know, and playing pinochle. We played pinochle, and we played, well, we had cosmolined all the guns, you know, and they were sitting there, and they weren't even going to get wet, only when it rained, you know. And so consequently, we played pinochle. And the skipper, when there was something to do, he said to me, called me one day and said, well, Joe Guns, he said, I understand, talking to the engineering officer, you're taking a course in refrigeration. He said, I got some problems here in the ship, he said, and I got nobody to fix them, he said. How would you like some practical factors? Now, if anybody knows anything about the Navy, you learn your practical factors before you get to be a non-commissioned officer. That was my chance. And he called me in and he said, so I went at it and I did it. And one day I'm up there playing pinochle with the boys, and the skipper sends the messenger up there and says, tell Joe Guns I want to see him in my living compartment. So I went down to the living compartment. He says, sit down, pull up a chair. I got something I got to tell you. He says, I understand when you get back to the States, you're going to ship over. I said, no, sir. I said, I'm going home and get married. I was engaged to an athlete. I said, no, sir, I'm going home and get married. If I made you first class, would you ship over? I said, no, sir, I'm going to go home and get married. So he said, all right. He said, I don't care. He said, you do what you want. And when we get back to the States, he says, but in the meantime, he says, I'm going to make you first class. And I says, no, sir. I said, I'm not qualified to be first class. I said, I've never studied ballistics and all that stuff. I have to know to be. I don't care. He said, you did such a good job on my refrigeration work. He said, I got to give you something. So the last 3 months I was on the net on that LSD 881, I went, sewed on my chevrons, and I was a first class gunner's mate for about 3 months before I got out of the Navy. Oh, I had enough points for 2 people to get out. Well, when I was in Portland, waiting for that net tender to be built, my enlistment ran out. They called me in the office and told me, now, Joe Guns, you got 2 choices. Either you're going to go into the reserves, which will be a V6, which means you're eligible to get discharged 6 months after the war is over, or you can ship over for 2 years and we'll give you $300. I looked at that situation in there and I said, well, a war is going to last at least two years. I might as well take the $300. The biggest mistake I made was I put it in the bank. In 3 months I was broke. I was over there helping some bartender buy a new car is what I was doing. Well, I was discharged wrong also, and I didn't realize it at the time. They weren't supposed to discharge me in San Francisco. But they did pay for my way to come home. That they did. Now, shortly before that, when I got off the net tender and I came back to the States and I landed in San Pedro, they sent me home on an OLNAV that said a man who has got been overseas will get 38 days leave. That's 30 days leave and 8 days travel time. And then he will report to a receiving station nearest his home. They didn't do that to me. They discharged me from San Pedro, and I got on a train and I came home. And then my order said, report to Shoemaker, California. That ain't right. I should have either reported to Chicago or to Minneapolis. But I didn't. I paid my way this way and that way, and guess how they billed me? From Shoemaker to San Pedro, $52. They owed me $100. You know, I kept that $52 check till 4 years after I was out of the service before I cashed it, and they told me you might as well cash it because that's all you're going to get. I finally did cash it, but then they asked me to come back. Harry got mixed up with them Koreans over there. And they sent me a nice letter telling me, boy, if you come back here now, we're going to give you your rate back and we're going to make your time that you've been off there now. And I'm married now and I got a little girl, you know. And I'm working for the Public Service Corporation then. And it says, if you come back, we'll give you your time that you were a civilian, we're going to add that to your time towards retirement. Well, you treated me like dirt when I come out of here. You did everything in your power to get rid of me. And now you want me to come over there and go over there in Korea with that stuff? You can take it and stick it where the sun don't shine. Because I love my country, but I don't trust those dudes that are running it. I probably knew more people from going to reunions than I ever knew all the time in them 3 years I was aboard. That's the truth. Now, if you happen to be on a ship like that, and there's a number of divisions, and I was in the 5th Division, and then we were in charge of the broadsides, and I was a gunner's mate on the broadsides. That was my working station. And I knew everybody that had something to do with that. But what them guys down there, and I knew the cooks. I knew some of the cooks because the galley was on the same deck with us. It's always nice to know a cook. Anyhow, but most of the people on board ship you don't even know. And if you get caught in their compartment, they'll ask you, "What are you doing down here, Mac?" That's the first thing they're going to say after the war. Then everybody's their brother, you know. Oh, I met some wonderful folks. I did. You could probably tell by what I have to say that I very seldom am too far away from December the 7th. Because if you want to talk about traumatic experience, I don't think you'll ever find anything in your life that'll be more traumatic than have to do what we do because we feel obligated. If we don't do it, who's going to do it? And I still feel that way. I still feel that.